Heyo, what's up guys? Welcome back to Rule of Two Review, and as you can tell, my mouth is working again. Man, that feels good. So, let's talk about some video games. So, over the course of the past month or two, a pretty interesting piece of news has been circulating that I've yet to have a chance to talk about, and that is the news around the Atari Box. This weird, brand new entry, this piece of hardware from, yes, the company Atari of all things, that is apparently some sort of console that we're going to be able to play games on sometime in the near future. If I remember right, I think it was in the week or 2 weeks or so leading up to E3 that randomly this like 50-second video came out from Atari that was like kind of like a sizzle reel of some computer generated effects in like, you know, the corners of some sort of piece of hardware, and it's like, hey, we're Atari and this new Atari thing is coming, so get ready. And that was it. And then, of course, nothing was really revealed or discussed too much at E3. No major Atari news came out of E3. A few people on some of my videos and on Twitter were asking me if I was going to discuss it. And I absolutely have wanted to talk about this crazy scenario. But my real sort of perspective on this has been that I wanted to wait until there was more details and more news. I mean, I could have made a video about the fact that Atari put out a 50-second video that had literally no information on it, but I didn't really want to do that. That wasn't going to be fun. It didn't sound interesting to me to talk about, other than to just say, yep, Atari's doing something, don't know anything about it, bye. That's all I would have had to say. But luckily, a few days ago, some actual concrete details, and to be fair, I guess concrete might not be the best way to describe this. They're kind of still pretty vague details, but some details, some information from Atari about what they're trying to do with this Atari Box machine has finally come out, and now I feel like, yeah, it's probably time that I at least touch on what's going on here. So again, there are only scant quotes and pieces of information coming from Atari about the machine, but here's the gist of what they said in an email that was meant to sort of explain their position and their true purpose and goal with this new machine. Very quick and simple, one sentence. They basically revealed, quote, "Our objective is to create something new that stays true to our heritage while appealing to both old and new fans of Atari." So that statement to me is more of a conceptual idea, more of a mission statement, or an overall wide-reaching company goal of this machine, as opposed to what the actual practical machine itself and its specifications and its abilities really are. There's not a whole lot more details on that exact subject matter. There's a little bit of a description of some of the computer-generated photos of the actual machines. I believe just a concept of the machines has actually come out, and they basically described it, trying to skim through the notes here. The console features ribbed lines, a raised back, a front panel that can either be glass or wood, indicator lights that glow. It includes an SD card support, HDMI port, 4 USB ports. All these different things. 2 versions of the Atari Box will eventually be released, one in wood and one in a black/red color scheme. So that's really the ultimate gist of what the thing is going to look like. You know, the other thing they mentioned, here's the big thing actually, they said Atari plans to deliver classic games in the Atari Box alongside current content, quote unquote current content. So man, a lot of weird stuff happening around Atari the company and this actual machine. What the hell is it really going to be? We don't even know. This only gives us such a slight glimpse and idea of what they're trying to do. So 2 other main topics and points I want to hit on this video to kind of wrap up my ultimate thoughts on what's going on with Atari here. The first is what I think this thing might actually be, and the second is if Atari has a real shot at making a dent in the home console space. So the first idea, what is this thing really going to be? With this little bit of information, it's tough to tell. Is this supposed to be like an actual 9th generation competing current home console that's supposed to stand up against the Xbox, the Switch, the PlayStation brands of the world? Because that's going to be something pretty hard to do, and I'll get to that in a minute. Is it supposed to be that? Is it something that's more akin to an NES or an SNES Classic, or what they call these, what do they call them, clone consoles, or, you know, like a retro console? You know, you can buy all these different things, even Atari machines that are meant to just plug into a TV and you can play these old games. But then it also mentions current and newer content, and it has USB and HDMI ports. So to me, it kind of has a feeling of like what the Ouya was trying to be. And we all know that that thing unfortunately failed. But that was something meant to play kind of like quick, easy, downloadable cell phone-esque type games. I think it was built on Android architecture. Do not quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that it was. But regardless, it was this little box meant to just download those kinds of experiences with a semi-modern controller and to just be like a plug-and-play version of that. And it kind of sounds like, that's kind of my ultimate guess on what this thing is going to be, is something that will play kind of like, okay, it's kind of like, I'm guessing here, a mix between like the NES Classic and the Ouya, where it is probably going to give you access to a lot of the Atari 2600 and 5800 library of decades past, probably downloadable, I would assume, of course. And then it's also going to probably operate with some sort of ability to download current content. You would think bite-sized content, free-to-play kind of stuff, are the kinds of things we might see on cell phones. Maybe stuff that you might see released on like the eShop and Xbox Live and stuff like that, that might be multi-platform. Maybe it would get those kinds of experiences and indie releases. That could potentially be interesting and cool for people who are fans of those kinds of games. But I really feel that that's what it's going to be, man. I mean, what are we talking about here? The only other option is the first thing I mentioned, where it's actually trying to be a modern generation console that might also let you play old Atari games. Now here's the trick here with that though, guys. When it comes to Atari games, and I am somebody who I think can count as an authority on this, so a lot of you younger guys and girls out there who don't really understand this and might think it would be cool to play Atari games, let me tell you something. Those games were great in their day in the late 70s and early 80s, and I was born in 1980, so for the first 5 years of my life, until my older brother brought home an NES, I was playing it on our Atari 2600 that we owned and I grew up with, so I was playing Atari games in the early 80s as a very small kid. And I can tell you guys something. Yes, they were great at the time, but man, those games, they're not timeless. There's not a lot to them. They're not going to grab you. I don't think that there's a lot of appeal. As far as I see it, those games and that era of gaming is fascinating as a time capsule of what gaming was like in its early infancy before it crashed. I mean, hell, these are the games and the consoles that literally led to the video game crash that Nintendo had to actually, with zero hyperbole, save and bring back from the dead to make it the gaming industry that we know it today. The hobby exists today because Nintendo saved it from what was happening during the Atari and the ColecoVision and the Intellivision days. And I can tell you that these games, again, they only exist as a novelty. They really are not going to be fun. The way NES games are fun, when we turn on an NES Classic or an actual NES, even in 2017, and we play amazing timeless classics like The Legend of Zelda and Super Mario Bros. And Super Mario Bros. 3, and even the original Metroid or the old Mega Man games, Castlevania. These games, as old as they are, and as outdated as they really are, they're still good to this day, and you can still see appeal even if you didn't grow up with them. Sadly, the Atari generation and before, man, it's not that way. I'm telling you, you can't sell a machine like this on that era of gaming alone. So let's now take a step into the big part of this conversation, really the most interesting conundrum we might be in if in fact this thing turns out to be something that is meant to compete with the Xbox One, with the PlayStation 4, with the Nintendo Switch, and beyond. Are they trying to make an actual stab at the home console gaming market in 2017, in 2018, with the stiff competition as it exists today? So again, I don't think they're doing that, but let's operate for a little bit under the assumption that that is what they are trying to do. A modern 9th generation console that will play, in their probably best words, modern games like a Red Dead Redemption, like a Grand Theft Auto, like a Destiny, like a whatever else might be coming out, Final Fantasies and Resident Evils in the future. Are they trying to have a machine that plays those games, but again, also would even let you play old Atari games? I'll tell you that that idea I think is interesting, because I do like the idea of those games being made available on a service on a current home console. Let's pretend it was the Switch or Xbox Live or something where you could just download old Atari games for like $2. I mean, that's cool. Again, I know I was just talking about how those games aren't timeless the way other old games are, but I still think that there would be something if you were just to have access to them in that fashion. So create a machine that's a modern machine but also has exclusive access to those games. Sure, that's neat and all, but the problem is, Atari, I don't know that there's room for you in this business and in this industry today. Now, you guys know me. I'm not a hater. I'm not trying to sit here and talk smack to Atari, to diss Atari, to even say I don't like Atari. I have mad love in my heart for my days of as being a small boy with my younger brother playing the Atari before the NES came out and blew our freaking minds and changed our lives, obviously, forever. I would actually love for Atari to be successful. I want them back in the industry in a strong way. I prefer them as a third-party developer and publisher like they kind of were in like the early and mid-2000s for a period during like the 6th gen a little bit. So it's like if they were going to do something like this, I would only wish success on them. But I gotta be real here, you guys. If we were to talk about a world where Atari was trying to make a stab at this 9th generation market and beyond, no way, man. I just don't think that there's room for them. And that's the real key, is that I don't think that there is room for them. There's not room for a 4th player, I don't believe. For many, many years, and for many generations, I have been championing the idea that, you know what? No matter how any console generation ticks out, no matter who's number 1 or number 2 or number 3, I genuinely believe, and the industry has proved me right on this, I believe that there is just enough room for 3 serious competitive players in the industry, in the home console gaming space, for them to continue over and over and over again. We don't have to lose anyone. No one has to get shoved out. Nintendo's proven they can come back from a failure of a console with the Wii U. I think Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo have room to all coexist. I don't care who's the 3rd worst selling console. I mean, the 7th generation is a great example. You got the Wii with like 120 million units sold, and you got a PS3 and an Xbox 360 that each had like 70, 80 million units sold. No one lost money. No one was a disaster. No one was in danger of being kicked out of the business or running out of money. That wasn't the case, and I feel like we can see that over and over again, time and time again. I mean, since 2001, we've had 3 home consoles, dedicated home consoles in the market, and everyone's been okay. I mean, there's been ebbs and flows all around. Let's not be crazy, you guys. Of course, there's been different levels of success and certain struggles seen, absolutely, but no one has truly been knocking on the door of getting kicked out of the industry. That being said, once we start talking about a 4th player coming into the business, whether it's Apple, whether it's Valve, or in this case, whether it happens to be Atari randomly, if it's Atari, again, I wouldn't wish failure on any of these companies, but I don't think that there is enough room. So that would leave one of 2 options here. Atari enters this console space in 2018 or 2019 or whatever with the new machine, the Atari Box, and either they fail miserably, they go out of business for all time, and they just lose a bunch of money and people lose jobs, and it's this weird, embarrassing experiment, or in a weirder twist of events, it turns out to be an absolute runaway smash hit, a bigger hit than any of us ever could have seen coming, and then unfortunately, per my personal theory, which you may disagree with, or hell, maybe I'm even wrong, but let's say I'm right and there's only room for 3 guys in this business, Atari has a hit, one of the guys has to go. And would it be Nintendo? Heaven forbid. They might be the first ones to be on the chopping block. Sony and Microsoft have other divisions and more money than Nintendo, so maybe they would keep their systems afloat for longer. But even if it wasn't Nintendo, we still might lose the Xbox or we might lose the PlayStation. And I don't really want to live in a world where we lose one of those guys. I like the current console setup with the 3 players we have currently. If one of them chooses to leave of their own accord, like I've kind of postulated maybe Microsoft would just decide to step away from the console business, that's a different story. But as far as having any of these current guys absolute just fail and just get kicked out by some new kid, and I guess it's kind of a misnomer to call Atari the new kid, but you know what I mean, a new console comes into the space and kicks one of them out, that just doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't feel comfortable. I don't want to see that happen to any of those guys, and especially because I am of the belief that Nintendo might be the first ones on that chopping block. I certainly don't want that because, you know me, Nintendo is my favorite company, so I would be inconsolable if something like that happened, especially to Nintendo. So, you know, when it comes to what Atari's doing here, this became, as per usual, a nice, long discussion for me about what could be going on here. There's a lot of angles to this, I think, potentially, based on what's happening. This might be a nothing box. This might be this weird experiment that doesn't turn into anything, or it becomes literally just a plug-and-play NES Classic sort of thing, and it just is what it is, and it's not meant to make a dent, and that's totally fine. The other element here, gosh, I didn't really talk about this. I think that this is rumored to be something they're setting up to be a Kickstarter, and if that's the case, I'm out completely, not interested, super uninvested in something like this being a Kickstarter. A, because Kickstarter campaigns aren't interesting to me, and B, because Kickstarter campaigns fail so often, and even if they make the money, either the product ends up not releasing or the product ends up being a disaster when it launches. It's just Kickstarting and crowdfunding, it's just a big mess to me. It's just, ugh. So if that's what they're doing, it's not even going to ever materialize, in my opinion, if this is really about a kickstarting campaign. If, in fact, if it's its own thing that's meant to support itself on its own legs and its own business investors and release that way, it's a different story. So, anywho, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to get to the end of this here. A lot of things going on. Is this meant to be an Ouya type box? Is it meant to be an NES or an SNES Classic kind of thing? Or is this an 8th or 9th generation console attempt from Atari? You've heard my thoughts on how I feel all of that stuff would play out if that's what they're doing. I really want to hear from you guys. What do you think about the Atari box and what might be happening, and my theories and everything I've discussed here today? Very curious what you guys think about Atari coming back into the home console space. So, that's it for me today. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and as always, I will catch you next time on another video.